If you're fans of my channel, you've heard of the Steiner P4Xi, but you know it in the 1 to 4 magnification range. For a very limited time some years ago, Steiner had made the P4Xi in the 4 to 16 magnification range. This was exclusive for a couple of distributors and came in around the $1,500 price point. Unfortunately, these are all but discontinued now. So why are you even watching this video? Well, maybe you want to find one of these secondhand, maybe they caught your eye, or maybe you just want to watch my videos and listen to my sweet, sultry voice. Either which way, thank you very much for tuning in. The Steiner P4Xi 4-16 by 56 comes in a very nice box. Steiner does the boxes really well. As far as what else comes in the box, not a whole lot. You have an Allen key, a battery, and the owner's manual. With all that being pushed to the side, let's go over the physical attributes of this 4-16. The first thing we're going to talk about is the weight. Just shy of 33 ounces on my scale isn't that heavy for a 34mm tubed 56mm front objective optic. Something to compare it with is the Gen 2 SH4 from Arken. This is a 4-16 by 50, which is typically what you'd find on this magnification range. As you can see, it comes in significantly heavier. So the weight on this thing is pretty light. With that being said, on to the fast focus eyepiece, which does turn extremely easily and extremely smoothly. I prefer fast focus eyepieces being much harder to turn simply because you don't have to worry about it, coming loose on you at will. This will absolutely come loose on you if you rub against something just the right way. As far as the wiggle, there isn't a whole lot, so it is made well, it's just damped completely wrong. From there, we're going to check out the magnification ring, which does not include a cattail or a throw lever. Throw levers are available for this thing. The 4-16 magnification range is 180 degrees apart, so completely standard. And unlike with the fast focus eyepiece, the damping on this is beautiful. It's very smooth and easy to turn, but not too easy or too hard. It's really nice. However, it still would benefit greatly from a throw lever. From underdamped to just right back to underdamped. The illumination control on this thing feels like there's no detents. You can see just how easily and how quickly it pops from one control to the next. There is the slightest bit of detent just to hold it in the control setting that you want, but it really doesn't feel like it's going to stay there if you look at it funny. Another thing I really don't like about this sort of illumination control is that the turnstile for it is the battery compartment. So if you don't lock this thing up tight, it can and will come loose on you. And that O-ring inside doesn't yield the highest amount of confidence for this thing being fully weather sealed. The battery, however, is held in there by a bunch of little tiny claws that are so efficient at holding the battery, and I had to pull out a small Allen key to try to pry it up and out. So, at least you don't have to worry about your illumination shutting off. But unfortunately, you got to worry about everything else entering into your scope. With the battery out, you can see just how many little fingers are in there, and they are very efficient at holding that battery in place. One thing I did not have a problem with this scope is the illumination, so at least there's that. Let's shift our attention now to the side focus, which we start at infinity and work our way down to its minimum of 50 meters. This is very, very far for a lot of you guys that want to shoot up close. It's less than 180 degrees, and it's kind of upsetting because you got this giant knob with these really nice splines built into the outside, and you got such a small, narrow sweep for it. Again, though, this is only a 4-16, so you don't really need it that much. This is damped better. It is harder to turn, but unfortunately, it's not very smooth. It feels gritty and nasty, and it's not anything like sand inside. You can actually feel the internal mechanism moving. It's honestly quite bizarre feeling, and it's one of the worst side focuses I've ever really felt. From there, the trend is going to continue. These turrets are among the worst I've ever felt, but yet the best sounding I've ever heard, and yet the worst I've ever operated. There is no lock feature, but these things are so tight to turn that it feels like there is a lock engaged. One cool feature of this is that it does at least have a rotational indicator, but it has that color window underneath. The bottom numbers are in white, the top numbers are in green, so as we crest the one full turn mark, what do you think is going to happen? That's right, that window turns from white to green, which is really cool and a nice feature. But if that feature makes these turrets sound and feel the way that they do, then I would throw that in the garbage and never have to worry about turning these turrets past 10 mils ever, because they're that horrible. It's not only really hard to turn, but it's got way too loud of a sound and way too much rubbery feel to it. It is the most bizarre combination I have ever heard. So with that, I'm going to segue now into the turret twisting segment of this video so you can get a sense of just how bizarre these turrets are for yourself. Not only are these the hardest turrets I've ever had the chance of turning, but they also have the most rubbery feeling to them. I can't describe it. I can't explain it, but they are not great. With all that now being out of the way, let's get behind this thing and see what it's like to actually use. The first thing we're going to notice is the SCR reticle. It's a very standard milling reticle in the first focal plane. Another thing you might notice if you are, again, fans of my channel and frequent watchers is just how large the view looking through this thing is. It is monstrous, and that has a couple of things to do with the overall design philosophy, I believe, of this. 34mm tube, 56mm front objective, and it's only a 4x multiplier. Of course, with this being in the first focal plane, as we adjust and increase the magnification, the reticle is going to adjust as well and maintain the correct scaling. So this way, 1mm is 1mm, whether it's at 4x or at 16x. The illumination on this I find to be adequate. It's good enough. Better than some, but not as good as the top tier scopes. This is, by the way, made in the US using German glass. I forgot to mention that during the unboxing segment. With the lights off, you can see that the steps in the illumination are at least pretty even. Sometimes you might go from like the highest to the next lowest, and it's like going from high to medium to low. This is at least scaled pretty appropriately when you go from its maximum to its minimum illumination. A good scope is only good when it's proven itself to be good. So let's throw this thing on my tracking rig and see what it's like to track. Already the SCR reticle doesn't line up perfectly to my target. This target has proven itself time and time again to be very accurate and consistent because I measured it literally to the ½ inch as far as the distance. Anyway, as we start doing our little mini box test, you might see that it's not going to line up 100%. But again, the reticle is not perfect to my target, but does the erector line up perfectly to the target? That's all that matters. 4 mils up, 4 mils right, and you can see that the reticle doesn't line up with the target, but the center is roughly where it has to be. So is it the reticle that's messed up or the erector? I say we adjust our windage back to 0 and continue up. Using the turret to churn ice cream, you can see we finally eventually get to 10 mils of added elevation, and you can see that the center crosshair lines up on that 10 line basically perfectly. When we, of course, reset the turrets back to 0, the reticle isn't 100% lined up again, so it still proves that there's about a 1 or 2% discrepancy with the reticle to the target, not the erector to the target, if that makes any sense. So it's still off a little bit. As far as any slop in the windage or the elevation erectors, I couldn't find any. It's perfectly fine. They're tight. I mean, they're tight because they're really physically really hard to turn, but they're tight because they just perform quite well. Pulling ourselves out from the dark, deep shadows of our subterranean garage out into the real world with a bright, sunny, beautiful day, let's see how this glass actually performs at varying distances. Because the scope has a side focus of 50 meters, that is why the tracking test and the reticle didn't look perfect, because I had to find a happy balance in between it. But 50 meters is actually very far, especially if you're like me, a rimfire shooter that shoots consistently inside 50 yards, or maybe you're a airgun shooter which shoots even closer than that. This is going to be extremely limiting, especially in the higher magnifications. Looking really quickly at our 31-yard power transformer, yeah, it looks like crap in the higher magnification ranges because this thing only goes down to 50 meters on the side focus. No surprise there. Moving our attention to our 400-yard brick building, at 4x, you can see we have a giant view looking through it. At 4x, the field of view is claimed at about 27.5 feet at 100 yards. So 4 times that, boom, that's roughly what you're seeing right now. But the numbers only tell half the story. Because the view looking through this is so large, it seems a lot larger than that. In fact, the magnification seems a little bit higher than that only because of just how big everything is. It's really, really pretty to get behind this. As we increase the magnification all the way up to its maximum of 16x, adjusting the side focus very little, really doesn't do all that much. For some people, this will be a pro. For some, it'll be a con. For me, I like the fact that all I have to do is set the side focus somewhere in the middle, and I could use my magnification range completely at almost any distance, with the exception of the far extremes where I really have to fine tune it. But for a general purpose rifle scope, especially a tactical one, this is a pretty nice feature. It means that you have to dial in the side focus a lot less, but the depth of field is something that isn't really there. You can see that to the far left, that tree line's like around 250 yards, our brick building's at 400, and the trees behind that are around the 700 yard mark, and you can see they're all in focus. Some people like having the plane of existence where they're actually shooting at a target to be the only thing in focus and everything else out of focus, so this way they don't get tripped up with things being too close together. A perfect case in point is, at quick glance, this picture that we're looking at right now. You think everything's right on top of one another, but there's actually a couple hundred yards between each one of those layers. Pushing it back to 900 yards, you can see that power tower comes in looking beautiful. Keep in mind, folks, there was some mirage during this day. This was summer of 21. That's right. I've been sitting on this video series for almost 2 years now. Thank you very much. Reason is I got bombarded with viewer submitted scopes and company submitted scopes, and Steiner videos don't do all so well. So I took my sweet ass time getting this out, but I'm tired of looking at my folders waiting to be picked apart and finished. As far as the image stability, this being only a 4x multiplier at maximum here, it's very good. Pulling it back a little bit on the magnification, we push it side to side, and everything stays sharp all the way up to the far extremes. To give you a better understanding of the Eyebox on this thing, let's get behind it in a more dynamic approach. At 4x, you can get 2 feet away from the scope or right on top of it and still be able to use it. That is one of the larger benefits of having a smaller magnifier inside. What I mean by magnifier inside, this is a 4x optic. It goes from 4 to 16. Divide those two together, you get a number that spits out as 4. As a result, the glass is not stressed as much. I like to use the word stressed because everyone can understand, oh, the more work you do, the more stressed out you get, and thus the worse everything becomes. In this case, it's like it's just sitting on a beach, earning 20%. When we increase the magnification to around 10x, you'll see that it's still very easy and large to get behind. Despite the fact we're at 50 yards and the image isn't going to be perfectly in focus for what this scope is capable of performing, we could still get a very good sense of how big the Eyebox is on this. And that's maximum here of 16x. You can dance around this thing and still be able to line yourself up. Yes, the shadows do creep in a little bit, but they're manageable. If you have a halfway decent cheek weld behind this thing, you could use it basically throughout its entire magnification range. Because the magnification goes above 10x, I take it to 1,000 yards. And here the image is gorgeous, very sharp and clear. There's the slightest hint, the slightest taste of chromatic aberration in the high contrast areas, but it's so minimal you don't really notice it here. Though to the naked eye, especially in very bright sunny environments, the chromatic aberration is much more apparent. I add my standard suite of 10 added mils and reacquire my initial 0 to see how well the optics can maintain a high level of clarity and sharpness at distance, because if you're shooting at distance, odds are you're going to be adding some elevation to it as well. With 10 added mils focusing back on our target, you can see the center part of that image is very sharp. The bottom part of the tree line does come out of focus a little bit, but for where it counts in the center, where you're going to be primarily focusing on, the image is very nice. I adjust the side focus just a little bit, and you can see it doesn't really make that much of a difference where it counts in the middle. Overall, an excellent performance. Another area where this scope should really shine is in lower light environments. Given the fact, again, it's only a 4x multiplier and it's got a 56mm front objective, I expect this thing to let in a ton of light. Illumination on full, like I said earlier, is just about bright enough for what we'd actually need. As we increase the magnification very slowly to its maximum, you will take note that the brick building does not change brightness intake at all. It is a beautiful image, and yes, getting behind this scope is very bright to the naked eye. Whether you're zeroing in on an animal during twilight hours like seen here, or if you're at a square range on a bright summer's day. Actually, if you are behind this thing on a very bright day, you will probably need sunglasses when you get behind it because the thing lets in that much light. I did make a video comparing the 3 to 18 by 50 and 3 to 18 by 56mm versions of the Meopta Optica 6s in first focal plane. That one, you didn't really notice that much of a difference, but typically a 56mm front objective lets in a lot more light than a 50mm. I'm going to jump headfirst into the comparison segment, and we're going to start with another outdated discontinued Steiner. This one is the Military 4-16x50 featuring the G2B reticle. This is another first focal plane 4-16, and because discontinued, good luck finding one new. However, they do pop up used for around the same price as the P4Xi, maybe even a little bit less if you get lucky. The Military does have all of the exact same features as the P4Xi, however, all of the controls on the Military are exquisite. They feel leaps and bounds better than the P4Xi. From an exterior standpoint, the Military is without a shadow or question of doubt a vastly superior feeling scope. But feeling good and looking good are two totally different things. If you look at the Military by itself, the image is definitely nice. It's bright, it's clear, it's got some good sharpness to it, but the contrast and colors are a little bit off. The P4 definitely has a much more vibrant looking image to it. As far as which one I'd pick between these two, I'd have to go with the Military. I ended up selling both of these. Both of these were filmed, like I said, about 2 years ago, side by side to one another, and as much as I loved both of them, neither of them really worked for any of my particular needs, especially considering that the side focus is locked at 50 meters as a minimum. I do a lot of shooting inside of 100 yards, and it really does bring the overall capacity of the scope down for me by a good bit. Plus, at the time, because these didn't really serve a role, I figured the money that I can get from selling them would go into other scopes, which is coincidentally exactly what had happened. At 1,000 yards plus 10 mils, the Military really starts to pull ahead. The P4Xi does maintain a very good image, but the Military just ekes it out with the overall sharpness. Even though the field of view is a little bit tighter with the Military, it looks like, it's still just a vastly superior scope overall. And if you are stuck between these two used, absolutely go with the Military. My next comparison is going to be with a scope that costs roughly the same as the P4Xi does used, and that's going to be the Meopta Optica 6 3-18x50, primarily in first focal plane. You can get these with a plethora of different reticles. This one features the MRAD 1 reticle, and is the scope that I bring up most during comparisons, because for the price point, these things are incredible. Not only do they offer a fairly large magnification range, being 3-18, it's a 6x multiplier as opposed to a 4, but it performs basically as good as one could expect any scope on the market to perform. And because the side focus goes down well below 50 yards, you can see that we can get a picture perfect looking image here at a 31 yard power transformer at maximum magnification. But things don't end there for the Optica 6 versus the P4Xi. Because it's a 3x at the bottom end as opposed to a 4x, we have a much larger field of view at what we'd see at 100 yards. The P4Xi at 100 yards at minimum is 27.5 feet, whereas the Optica at 3x is 33.5 feet. It might not sound like a big difference, but looking at them side by side, you get a much larger and greater sense of what you're looking at through the Optica 6 at its minimum magnification. Now you might be saying, well, of course it's 3x for the Optica versus 4x for the P4Xi, but surely those two extra x is going to make a big difference with the Optica at its maximum magnification as opposed to the 16x on the P4Xi. Well, you do have a point. You are going to be zoomed in a little bit more, but you're also going to be sacrificing a lot more field of view. And because the view looking through the P4Xi is vastly larger than what we see with the Optica, when both of these are at their maximum magnification, the image looking through the P4Xi looks about the same size as the Optica. However, it has a much larger field of view. At their maximums, the Optica has a 5.8 foot field of view, whereas the P4Xi has a 6.9 foot at 100 yards. Here at 400 yards, you can see that makes a huge difference. You see a lot more on the sides with the P4 as opposed to the Optica. This is a perfect case in point that sometimes numbers on a piece of paper don't add up, but through the real world, they really do make a huge difference. Both of them at their maximum at 900 yards. Again, yes, you can see the Optica does have a little bit more ultimate magnification, but the P4Xi does have a much larger field of view, even though that power tower doesn't look like there's a huge difference between them as far as its scaling goes. Perfect case in point of, again, those two extra X might not mean all that much if your field of view and your view looking through the scope is limited. Despite that though, the fit, finish, and controls of the Optica 6 is why I'm going to pick that over the P4Xi, despite the fact that the P4Xi is really impressive to get behind. Going from another discontinued scope to a scope that didn't have the same magnification range but cost the same amount of money, now I'm going to go with a scope that has the exact same magnification range as the P4Xi but costs considerably less. So little right now that if you're on the fence about buying one, you better buy one. These things, the Arken SH4 Gen 2 4-16x50 that is, right now are going for the low to mid 200s, which is so cheap I wonder how Arken's even making money with them. Just because something is cheap, though, doesn't mean that it's not going to be good, especially for the price point. For the price point, the Arken is extremely hard to beat. Optically, they are very, very nice, despite the fact that when I filmed this segment for the Arken SH4, it came out extremely washed out, which is why the image doesn't look as good as it possibly could, especially when compared to the Steiner P4Xi. For that, I am sincerely apologetic. I made sure I never make that mistake again, but things happen, right? Getting on with the SH4 versus the P4Xi, ironically enough, they both have 4s in their title because guess what? They're both 4x multiplied scopes. However, the SH4 does pull ahead of the P4Xi in a couple of key departments. Number one, the view looking through the Arken is monstrous. Despite that, it does not have any real optical issues at the minimum or maximum magnification, and the field of view is actually significantly larger with the SH4 as opposed to the P4. Namely, at their minimum magnification, the SH4 has a field of view of 30 feet versus the P4Xi's 27.5, and at their maximum, as seen here, you're talking about 7.5 feet with the Arken versus 6.9 feet with the Steiner. That is a monstrous difference between these two. Here at 200 yards, you get a good sense of what I'm referring to. The targets on both of these through the image are basically the exact same size, but yet looking at the Arken, you can see that the view looking through it is much larger and the field of view makes a massive, massive difference. The more I've gotten behind 4-16 magnified scopes, the more I'm really starting to appreciate them. I like the fact that they're only a 4x magnifier, so the image is not going to be stressed like I've mentioned numerous times throughout this video. At the minimum, they're usually going to have a really clean 4x that's very flat, bright, and forgiving with the Eyebox. And at 16x, again, you're going to have very similar characteristics, and typically you're going to have a much larger field of view looking through it than you will with a 6x multiplied scope with like what we saw with the Optica 6. Truth be told, a 4-16 on a DMR style rifle would be phenomenal. Between these two, I gotta go with the SH4 just given its price versus performance. From a super budget comparison to a super duper extra expensive comparison, the Nightforce ATACR 4-16 costs 10 times that of what you could typically find the Arken SH4 Gen 2 to cost right now, which is going to be roughly $2,700 depending on your reticle and whether you want first focal plane or second focal plane. This thing comes in at around 30 ounces and is perhaps one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had behind a scope. In fact, it makes me want to take my shirt off and just scream at the top of my lungs. It was that wonderful. However, despite how wonderful it is, it actually has a slightly smaller field of view as opposed to the P4Xi. At maximum, you're going to find 6.9 feet, which is even, but at minimum, you're going to find 26.9 feet with the ATACR versus 27.5 feet with the P4Xi. That's probably in part to, number one, the P4Xi has a much larger front objective than the ATACR, but also Nightforce probably tuned the glass and the overall scope to have much higher image resolution as opposed to any other scope in this category. And those changes absolutely pay off. The sharpness, colors, and clarity to the ATACR at any magnification, at any distance, is better than almost anything I've ever gotten behind. I will gladly give up a slightly smaller view through the scope and a slightly smaller field of view at whatever distances we're looking at or magnification to get what the ATACR gives us, which is incredible sharpness, incredible clarity, and incredible just overall experience looking through this thing. At 200 yards, yes, the P4Xi can produce a very good image, and for about $800, it's extremely, extremely good. The ATACR at $2,700, that is the ultimate question. But if you're trying to figure out between an $800 scope and a $2,800 scope, then you're not watching this review. You're just buying the Nightforce ATACR because you want perhaps the best DMR scope on the planet, especially something that's going to be as robust as humanly possible. You're buying the ATACR because you're going to war. You're buying the ATACR because you want the best. You're buying the ATACR because maybe you got the money for it and you don't care about anything else. The ATACR is an absolute no-holds-barred style of scope, and it's something that without a shadow or question of doubt, is going to withstand the test of time. The P4Xi is good, but it's not ATACR good. If you have the money for the ATACR and you're watching this video, God bless you, buy it and be happy. If not, the P4Xi is a pretty close, I wouldn't even say second or third, but it's a pretty close competitor to something like the likes of the ATACR. So you just spent 24.5 minutes of your life watching this video on a scope that's discontinued that you probably can't even find used unless you're proactively looking all the time. What can I at least end this off with to make you feel satiated in some way, shape, or form? If you have a P4Xi 4-16 by 56 and you enjoy it, God bless. It's a really nice scope to look through and to get behind. To operate and control, it definitely leaves a lot more to the imagination, especially when you I can make a comparison with a $250 scope that feels better to operate the controls of. It really starts to put it into perspective for you. If you're in the market for a used P4Xi, again, you can check out Gunbroker, eBay, a couple of the classifieds, and you could find them from time to time for sure. Are there better options out there? Only you could really decide what's going to be optimal for you. The 4-16 is absolutely a magnification range that I do appreciate, and I would have kept either the P4Xi or the military if the side focuses went down below 50 yards, because I like to shoot really close sometimes, and these scopes didn't give me that option. Another thing they didn't offer is locking turrets, which is something that I'm a big fan of. The only person I could really recommend this scope to is someone that already knows what it is and wants exactly what it has to offer. For anybody else, I think there's a lot of other options out there that you can get for around the same price point that really make a compelling argument in one way, shape, or form, whether it's the magnification, this overall feature set, the controls, just the vibrancy of the image, or the Eyebox. There's a lot to this scope, but I do think that there are other options out there that just are more coherent overall packages. And that is my slightly overly bland ending to this review. Hopefully some of you found this video informative for your next purchase, and hopefully the rest of you found it just entertaining to watch. With that, a huge thank you to all of you for making this video possible, because without you, I wouldn't bother doing this anymore. So, thank you very much. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.